Recently I had a look at the first entry into Shozy's new Form lineup, and that was the $75 Form 1.1, which featured a hybrid driver configuration and an overall impressive build quality and design for the price. So can the more expensive Form 1.4 improve upon the 1.1, or is it just a pricier option for those with deeper pockets? If you caught the review on the more affordable Form 1.1, then you'll know pretty much exactly what to expect from the 1.4 in terms of design, save for a few minor differences here and there. The well-designed and ergonomic acrylic shell has an almost all-black color scheme, with only the faceplate having a more standout design. Unlike the more subdued glittery faceplate on the 1.1, the faceplate of the 1.4 almost looks like some sort of gemstone, perhaps like an amethyst of sorts, but just without the purple color. The other difference is that because the Form 1.4 houses more drivers, the housing itself is slightly more bulky. But Shozy have done a remarkable job of keeping it just as comfortable in the ear as the more affordable, slightly trimmer 1.1. We're also getting the same metal ear tip nozzle, which makes using aftermarket tips much easier too. The cable is also exactly the same as the one on the Form 1.1. It features a twisted design for the portion up to the splitter, and the entire length is covered with a protective nylon material. It seems durable enough, although it is a bit on the stiff side, which makes it prone to creating kinks. Unfortunately, the 1.4 also has the same potential cable connection problem as the 1.1, due to the fact that the pinholes for the 2-pin connector sits flush on the housing, rather than being slightly countersunk to offer some strain relief. So whilst the 1.4 and the 1.1 share some very stark similarities in their design and build, it's when we consider their respective sound signatures that we find some noteworthy differences. We'll get to how they compare in a bit, so for now let's just take a look at the response graph of the Form 1.4 on its own. Overall, we can see a response which is pretty well balanced. There are a few spikes in the treble, which is indicative of using multiple balanced armatures, but it's only the single spike at 5 kHz which is at a noticeably higher level than the rest of the spectrum. This graph, however, is with the included double flange ear tips, and we can see that by changing the ear tips to the black silicone tips and foam tips, we can change the response by a fair margin. And there are also aftermarket tips such as the spin fit tips and my personal favorite, the JVC spiral dot tips. For the vast majority of IEMs I've tried, I almost always settle on the spiral dots as my preferred tips, mainly due to their comfort. However, in the case of the Form 1.4, it's also the ear tip which tames that 5 kHz spike the most, and this is a very good thing. When listening to the Form 1.4 with the spiral dot tips, what I'm getting is a pretty well balanced signature which feels U-shaped overall. Yes, there are times when those treble peaks can still creep up on me just a little more than what I would like, but on the whole they tend to be reasonably well controlled. It's just with a few tracks here and there where the S and T sounds can seem a little forced, rather than what my natural perceptions of those sounds are, but it's not too bad. The bass is also a little bloated, but it's still very enjoyable nonetheless. Keep in mind that my sound impressions are mostly with reference to the Etymotic ER2 series, which are my personal benchmarks when it comes to what I perceive to be an exceptionally natural and refined signature. However, I think a more relevant comparison, and one which I'm sure many of you will be interested in, would be to the more affordable Form 1.1. Again, when using the spiral dot tips on the 1.1, it becomes apparent that the 1.1 has a considerably more V-shaped signature, whereby both the bass and the treble is more elevated. Whilst the bass itself does sound more bloated, I was more concerned with the treble. As mentioned, the 1.4 has a peak at around 5 kHz, but so does the 1.1, and in this case it's even more apparent than on the 1.4. What this results in, at least for me personally, is a sound which just feels too artificial. In comparison, the 1.4 feels flatter, more balanced, and more refined. As mentioned in the review of the 1.1, it was too fatiguing for longer sessions, and so I just didn't find myself really enjoying my music very much, especially when those aforementioned S and T sounds would pop up in vocals. It just didn't sound right. There was also another characteristic which stood out to me about the 1.4, and that was that it sounded a bit warmer and more inviting overall, which I preferred way more than the brighter and more forced signature of the 1.1. So I guess you can already see what my conclusion will be with regards to the value of the Form 1.4. Would I take it over the 1.1? Well, yeah, absolutely, every single time. In terms of audio quality, it's definitely a step or two above the 1.1 when it comes to sounding natural and coherent. Of course, if you know my preferences by now, then you'll know that for the time being at least, I would still pick the ER2 series over pretty much anything else. But let's just stick to these two Shozy models for now. The problem for the 1.4 is the difference in price between it and the 1.1. Make no mistake, it truly is a better product, and as such it really should cost more than what the 1.1 does. But should it cost 2.5 times as much? We're talking about $75 versus $200 here, and for most people that isn't exactly a negligible difference. My advice would be that if you like a more V-shaped signature, and in particular one which has more emphasis around that 5 kHz point, then you'll probably like the 1.1 more, and it would make no sense for you to spend the extra cash on the 1.4. However, if you have become more accustomed to a flatter and more balanced sound, then you really are not going to enjoy the 1.1. And if you had to pick between only these two IEMs, well, then I'd say to just suck it up and pay the extra money. If you do get to listen to both of them, then I'm pretty sure you'll also find that the price gap just isn't linear with the improvement in the signature. But the fact is that you are getting a better sounding product nonetheless. So that's it for this review. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you are well during these dire times, and I hope that you stay healthy. But more important, I hope that if you can, you stay at home. Thank you so much for watching. Cheers.